From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Doris Polo. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has concluded a visit to Russia where he and President Putin agreed on a strategic plan for cooperation. At their meeting in Kremlin, President Putin reaffirmed Russia's commitment to carry on fulfilling the military technical agreements signed years ago with Venezuela. And he also assured President Maduro of Russia's support for the legitimate Venezuelan government and its dialogue with the opposition.
And of course, we are actively cooperating in the international arena. You know that Russia consistently supports all legitimate authorities, including the Institute of the Venezuelan President and that of the Parliament. And of course, we support the dialogue that you, Mr. President, your government is conducting with the opposition forces. We consider any refusal of dialogue to be irrational, harmful to the country, and bearing only threats to the welfare of the Venezuelan people. We always support legitimate authorities, and I think we have proved that we can jointly overcome any difficulties.
We support established cooperation in all areas. Last May, a meeting of the high-level commission of our countries was held, and many of the issues discussed at this commission were successfully resolved. We are talking about a number of areas: food, healthcare, energy, and many other areas. Therefore, today's meeting is very important. We can take stock of what has been done this year in order to see what problems we still have, what realities we are facing, how progress is being made in a number of areas, and make plans for the future. We always feel very comfortable in Moscow and are always happy to be here.
And President Maduro sent a video message from Red Square on Wednesday night.
Here we are, 3 degrees in Red Square, where it is now 10:15 at night. From here we send our greetings to all the people of Venezuela and to our brothers and sisters in Latin America and around the world, reasserting our belief that another world is possible, a world without empires, a world of fraternal relations. We have agreed with President Putin our strategic map of cooperation for the whole coming period, so that we can complete this year successfully and point towards 2020, 2021, 2022. I am leaving Moscow very pleased, because we have consolidated the path set by Commander Hugo Chavez, a path that will bear many fruits. Thank you to Russia, and thank you to President Putin. We will continue to overcome in the future.
Now, while President Maduro was in Moscow, a group of Russian military technicians touched down in Caracas. Interfax reported that the team arrived in Venezuela to carry out maintenance on some of the equipment supplied as part of the military cooperation agreement between the two countries. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has warned world leaders that tensions are high in the Persian Gulf region and that a single blunder could fuel what he referred to as a big fire. Rouhani also called out the U.S. for international piracy and merciless economic terrorism, referring to the increase in U.S. sanctions.
Upon the historical responsibility of my country maintaining security, peace, stability and progress in the Persian Gulf region and the Strait of Hormuz, I would like to invite all the countries directly affected by the developments in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz to the Coalition for Hope, meaning Hormuz Peace Endeavor. Distinguished colleagues, our region is on the edge of collapse, as a single blunder can fuel a big fire. We shall not tolerate the provocative intervention of foreigners.
On the margins of the UN General Assembly, U.S. President Donald Trump met with members of the Lima Group of Latin American countries to discuss their campaign against Venezuela. Venezuela's Foreign Minister gave Telesur his response to that meeting.
It's the puppeteer with the puppets. telling them what to do. And of course, they are all really frustrated because they have tried all year long to overthrow our government. It has been a continuous coup. They have sanctioned and they have imposed all this blockade against the Venezuelan people, and they haven't reached their goals. They haven't achieved their goals, and they won't. So it's really Trump trying to distract the public opinion of his own scandals, and it's about his political campaign as well. His face, the face of Trump, his was like disgusted. He didn't like to be there, no? Maybe because he doesn't like the Latin Americans, no? Su cara era de asco, no le gustaba estar en esa reunión. But, of course, he has to use Venezuela like Colombia uses Venezuela, and other countries use Venezuela in order to distract the public opinion and not to concentrate in their own issues, in their own problems. So that's the real truth. And we hope that someday the United States, the elite that rules in the United States, learns to respect not only the Venezuelan people, but all the Latin American peoples, and we can have a relation of mutual respect and political tolerance and ideological tolerance. We hope if President Trump or his government wants to have dialogue with the Venezuelan government, our hands are opened and we can have dialogue. If they respect us, we will respect them. Thank you so much.
Continuing with news on Venezuela, on Tuesday, lawmakers of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela returned to the opposition-controlled National Assembly. It was part of the agreement signed last week with sectors of the opposition to unblock the political deadlock.
Revolutionary lawmakers arrive at the National Assembly in Caracas to retake their seats. They withdrew 2 years ago when the opposition majority defied the Supreme Court and decided to admit 3 of their candidates whose election had been marred by fraud. As a result, the court declared the assembly in breach of the Constitution. The session was a turning point. The Chavista members will try to help the assembly overcome its breach of the Constitution and recognize the other powers of state. This is part of the agreement signed last week with that part of the Venezuelan opposition which opposes military intervention, coups, and economic sanctions. All things that the parties backing the self-proclaimed president, Juan Guaidó, have supported.
We are making this political gesture to open up debate, to open up the way for dialogue and constitutional solutions for understanding, so that the different powers of the Republic can resume their proper roles. That is why we are here.
The aim is to break the political deadlock and restore the political institutions, according to the opposition members who signed the agreement.
This reincorporation certainly gives the Assembly an opportunity for dialogue, for debate between the different ideas. Each side can strongly defend its positions, but then we can take decisions for the good of Venezuela.
One of these decisions has to do with achieving the necessary quorum to elect new members of the National Electoral Council. Time is against them. Elections to the Assembly are due next year. However, the extremist opposition insists that President Nicolas Maduro should step down and there should be a presidential election, which is not in line with the Constitution.
We will work to make this body work and work well, to overcome this body's breach of the Constitution and to prepare for the parliamentary elections in 2020, when we will go out and campaign for the votes of our people.
But the opposition objected to the presence of Chavista lawmakers who accepted other government posts while they were away from the National Assembly.
If someone accepted another government post, they lost their seat.
Although it's true that the Constitution says you lose your seat if you accept another public position, it is this Assembly that decides on its members, and this Assembly is in breach. And the ruling on that breach says that all its decisions are illegal. The Constitution is clear that the final decisions on such matters rest with the Constitutional Chamber of the Supreme Court.
You are wrong, and those who took other posts are no longer members. That's final.
This assembly is in conflict with the other powers of state, and I ask the people of Venezuela, who are accountable to, how can the country move forward? when those who are meant to solve problems cannot agree to sit down and work within the framework which applies to everyone, which is the Constitution.
It will be the Constitutional Chamber that has to solve this dispute.
We are not going to get stuck in this debate. All of us here were elected by the Venezuelan people, and as elected lawmakers, there is nothing to negotiate.
The cards are now on the table, and Juan Guaido's term as President of the Assembly is also running out.
Shifting gears now, at least 8 people have died in Indonesia after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake hit the Maluku Islands. According to the local disaster agency, 1 person died in a landslide triggered by the quake, while others were hit by falling debris. But the death toll is likely to rise. The earthquake was also felt in Ambon, a city of about 400,000 inhabitants, where it wrecked homes and sent people fleeing to the hills. In September 2018, a 7.5 magnitude quake and a subsequent tsunami in Palu on Sulawesi Island left more than 4,300 people dead or missing. Haiti's president is calling for a coalition to be formed as protests intensify for him to resign. We'll have more after the break.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Haiti's President Jovenel Moise has called on the opposition to help him form a unity government in a rare address to the nation on Wednesday. Moise continues to be pressured by a brewing political crisis and intensifying protests calling for his resignation. This as residents have been incensed at widespread fuel and food shortages, a weakening currency, double-digit inflation and corruption allegations. The president has since called his trip off to New York for the United Nations General Assembly due to the political tension gripping the country.
The people believed that the president was going to talk about his resignation. We have found out that he did not. He calls people garbage. People who voted for him say they don't agree with his manner of living. They didn't vote to stay in misery. They voted to improve their living conditions. We demand Jovenel to get out.
Brazilian indigenous chief Rouhani has rejected claims by President Jair Bolsonaro that he was a puppet of foreign governments. Speaking on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Rouhani accused the Brazilian president of facilitating the invasion of their ancestral lands. The chief says his people want to continue living as they always have, but notes they're facing a threat from illegal miners and land grabbers who allegedly invaded their Amazon since Bolsonaro took office. He also advised the president to leave.
Bolsonaro said that I am not a leader. It is he who is not a leader, and he has to leave. Before something serious happens, he must leave, for the good of everyone.
Electoral observers and experts are beginning to arrive in Bolivia to accompany the elections set to take place on October 20th.
With 1 month to go, The first European Union electoral observation mission has arrived.
The mission will continue until the conclusion of the electoral process, and during its time here, specific reports will be made that will certainly be made public as they are completed.
The European Union mission plans to carry out one of the most thorough studies of the whole Bolivian electoral process, which includes an exhaustive survey of the opinion of different sectors.
We have begun an intense program which will include meetings with the main authorities, political leaders, and civil society representatives. So in the coming days, this long-term mission will follow the whole Bolivian electoral process very closely.
Meanwhile, the political opposition is trying to discredit the election process. They have already attempted, without success, to mobilize citizens to push Evo Morales to abandon his candidacy for re-election and to get members of the Electoral Court to resign.
Beyond the current elections, I think they are going to try to undermine the process and take a position like that of the civic committees and claim to be defending democracy, whatever people decide at the polls.
With less than 1 month before people go to vote, the opposition is spreading doubts about the election and insisting that there will be fraud, fears which could be countered by these international observers.
Bolivia has a system which is based on electoral boards. Observers from each party are able to see all the voting records as soon as the polls close, so that they can check the validity of the results. This is what the international observers have to oversee, and that's why they are here.
This will be the first election in which the electoral register is audited by the Organization of American States, one of the demands of the opposition. The latest opinion polls indicate that Evo Morales will take first place and be re-elected in the first round if he maintains his current lead of more than 10 points over the former president, Carlos Mesa, who is in second place.
In Algeria, the brother of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for conspiring against the state and undermining the military. Said Bouteflika and 2 other officials allegedly planned to declare a state of emergency and fire the army chief as protests against the president were mounting in April. Said was widely seen as the real power behind the presidency after his older brother suffered a stroke in 2013. President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was ousted from power in April following protests calling for his resignation. Police in Eswatini have violently crushed demonstrations by civil servants who had taken to the streets to protest against low salaries. Police officers used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the civil servants who planned to march to the finance minister's office to demand for a 7% pay rise. They say the current wages are not enough for them to meet their basic needs amid the rising cost of living. In other news, science and knowledge are the main resources used by the Syrian people to overcome the economic war being waged on the country. University students are at the forefront of these efforts to overcome the difficulties facing everyday citizens.
This is the second expo of graduation projects for final year students, specializing in mechanical and electrical engineering at the University of Damascus. Here, ideas for reconstruction of their homeland thrive.
We are here to tell the entire world that it is an unjust blockade that is making us go through very rough circumstances. But they haven't been able to block our minds, and we continue looking for ways to move forward with our development.
Our students' contributions are very important for the reconstruction of Syria. That's why we organize this expo, to showcase their best ideas and then help them through state and private institutions to develop their projects into useful products for society.
Engineering students refuse to do nothing under such difficult circumstances. Their ideas are a great help to reconstruction efforts, especially in the worst hit areas after 9 years of war.
My sister was hit by a shrapnel in her spine, and due to the economic blockade, I was unable to buy the prosthesis she needed. After that, I designed a similar prosthesis that can be manufactured here and be sold at an accessible price.
Our power grid has been greatly damaged due to the war, so as renewable energy engineers, we have given ourselves the task of finding alternative power sources. From there, we came up with a number of ideas to provide low-cost energy for street lamps.
This expo is showcasing 80 projects that want to help society and promote productive development. It stands as a space where Syrians can make their best efforts to help in the reconstruction of their homeland.
We're taking one last break. When we come back, Ireland's president has joined calls for the reformation of the UN Security Council. Stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en él.
Dotting the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In Spain, the Supreme Court approved the exhumation of the remains of late dictator Francisco Franco from the mausoleum of the Valley of the Fallen.
Different organizations that represent the victims of Franco's regime rallied outside the Supreme Court on Tuesday. The Supreme Court ruled by unanimous decision in favor of the exhumation of the remains of dictator Francisco Franco from the Valley of the Fallen Memorial, where he was buried alongside hundreds of his victims.
You have to treat him as he really was, a murderer. He can't be treated as a head of state. He was a dictator, and you have to put a plaque where he is buried, where it clearly says that Franco was a murderer and a dictator.
The judgment dismissed the appeal by the Franco family that had halted the exhumation. It also rejected the request by his grandchildren to move his remains to the Almudena Cathedral in Madrid. His grandchildren have, however, vowed to approach the Constitutional Court to challenge the Supreme Court's ruling.
To deprive a family of the right to decide the fate of their grandfather's remains is sad. This right was acknowledged in the decree of the exhumation that was approved by the government.
Associations representing Franco's victims celebrated the court ruling, especially that Franco's remains will no longer be maintained using public funds.
A fascist and Nazi dictator like Franco can't have public recognition or a resting place in the Valley of the Fallen or in the Almudena of any public site. He should be given to his family and they can keep his remains at a family level.
However, the victims don't completely believe that the government has the political will to carry out the court ruling. They say they are certain that the process cannot take more than 4 hours to be completed, and they want it to be as quickly as possible in order to bring to end their 40 years of waiting.
The exhumation of Franco's remains is important for the Spanish society, but the purpose of this historic moment is to pay respect to the victims of Franco's regime. In the Valley of the Fallen, he is still surrounded by his victims.
There is still one judicial obstacle to carrying out the exhumation of the late dictator's remains. A judge in Madrid suspended the exhumation process due to concerns that it could pose a danger to the workers' lives. A great advance in the country's democracy, but there is still a long way to properly honor the memories of the Franco regime and to reform key institutions.
Ireland's President Michael Higgins has backed calls for the reformation of the United Nations Security Council. In his speech to the UN General Assembly on Wednesday, Higgins said the current system of only 5 permanent members is retrogressive. Several African countries, including Zimbabwe and South Africa, have in the past accused the United Nations of being undemocratic by giving certain member states more power than others.
Ireland, like many member states, is clear too on the need to reform the Security Council. For any entity to have legitimacy, it must reflect the makeup of the world in which it exists, the people of the world in which it exists. Quite simply, as we all know, many areas of the world are either insufficiently represented in the Security Council, underrepresented, or not at all represented. In particular, we continue to witness an historic and just underrepresentation of Africa, which was still ruled by colonial powers when the United Nations came into existence and the Security Council was established.
Libya's Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj has dismissed any chances of holding talks with renegade General Khalifa Haftar to negotiate an end to the country's conflict. Speaking at the UN General Assembly, Sarraj said Haftar has shown no interest in creating peace in Libya. He called Haftar a war criminal who could not be trusted. Clashes between troops loyal to Sarraj's Tripoli-based government and Haftar's forces have left more than 1,000 people dead and displaced tens of thousands since April.
We repeat that we will not sit once again with the war criminal Haftar. He is not a partner for peace. The aggressor forces have committed serious violations considered by international law crimes of war, as has taken place in Tripoli and in Mosul. There has been random bombing of civilian neighborhoods and attacks targeting airports and hospitals, and ambulances and critical infrastructure, as well as practices such as child recruitment. And the person responsible is the war criminal and everyone who supports him with financing and weapons. We ask the ICC to hold responsible criminals accountable.
That brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.